The meeting was called for a Sunday. That detail mattered to me more than people might expect. Sunday, the day my late wife Dorothy used to say was God's way of giving families one more chance to get it right before the week started over. The day I had spent 40 years cooking breakfast for whoever showed up at my door. The day my children had grown up believing was sacred in this house. They chose Sunday to try to take everything from me. I want you to hold that. My name is Raymond Ellison. I am 71 years old. I live on Sycamore Hill Drive in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, in the same house I bought in 1988, with Dorothy on a handshake and a prayer and a down payment that took us 6 years to save. I am a retired high school principal. 31 years at Jefferson High School, the last 14 as principal. I have sat across from angry parents, frightened students, school board members with agendas, and district attorneys. I know what a room feels like when someone has already decided the outcome before the conversation begins. I walked into my own living room that Sunday in March, and I knew within 30 seconds. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. Let me tell you about my children, and let me tell you about my grandson Marcus, who is 16 years old, 5 feet 11, quiet in the way that deep rivers are quiet, and who understood something about loyalty that his parents had somewhere along the way forgotten how to practice. Before anything else, I want to say something to everyone watching right now. If you are new here, welcome to this community. Hit that subscribe button, because what we talk about here matters. Real stories, real people, real consequences. The kind of stories that remind you that dignity is not something anyone can take from you unless you hand it over. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from, your city, your country. I want to know who is out there with me tonight. And while you are down there, press that like button. It costs you nothing. It means everything to us. Now, let me tell you about my family. I have 3 children. Denise, who is 48, lives in Charlotte, and works in hospital administration. She is organized, capable, and has been managing things since she was 9 years old, which was a quality I once called a gift, and have since come to understand can cut in more than one direction. Walter, who is 45, is a commercial real estate agent in Greensboro. Walter has always been the one who talks about money the way other people talk about weather, constantly, casually, and with the unshakable belief that everyone else finds it as interesting as he does. And then there is Patricia, my youngest at 42, who teaches at a community college in Raleigh, and who has, in the years since her mother passed, taken on a kind of concerned watchfulness about me that I understand comes from love, but which has a way of tipping, if you are not careful, into something that looks more like management. Dorothy passed in 2020, January, the worst month for losing someone because the world is already gray and cold and there is nothing blooming yet to remind you that things come back. She had been sick for 2 years, and we had known it was coming, and it still arrived like something no amount of knowing could have prepared either of us for. After Dorothy, the children changed. Not all at once. Gradually, the way erosion changes a riverbank. You don't notice any single day. You just look up one morning, and the edge is somewhere different from where it used to be. Denise started calling every week to ask about my finances. Not unkindly, but specifically. How was my pension? Was I keeping up with the property taxes? Had I thought about what I wanted to do long-term with the house? Walter started mentioning, in the sideways manner he had perfected over 45 years, that the property market in Winston-Salem was strong, and that a man in my position might want to think about liquidity. Patricia started forwarding me articles about senior living communities and independent living arrangements, always with a note that said something like, "Just something to think about, Dad, no pressure." I read every article. I filed them away. I said nothing. What I will tell you is this. My pension from the school district is $3,400 a month. I have no mortgage. I have a savings account that Dorothy and I built over 40 years of careful living. 2 people who grew up understanding that money was not decoration but foundation, and that you built it slowly, and you protected it, and you did not touch it for anything that wasn't necessary. That savings account has a number in it that would surprise people who look at a retired high school principal and make assumptions. None of my children knew the exact number, but they knew it existed. They had known it existed for years, and after Dorothy died, something in the way they talked about it shifted. The shift was subtle at first. Then it was less subtle. Then one Tuesday afternoon in February, Denise called me and said that she and Walter and Patricia had been talking, and that they thought it would be good for the whole family to get together and have a real conversation about the future. A real conversation, she said, about the future. I told her to pick a date. She picked Sunday. I want to tell you about Marcus before I tell you about the meeting, because Marcus is the center of this story, even though he barely spoke until the moment that changed everything. Marcus is Patricia's son, 16 years old, junior year at Mount Tabor High School in Winston-Salem. He is the kind of boy who reads 2 books at a time and keeps a notebook in his back pocket and notices things that adults assume teenagers don't notice, because adults have made the mistake of confusing a quiet exterior with an absent interior. He has his grandmother Dorothy's eyes. I notice that every time I look at him, the same particular steadiness, the same quality of attention, as if the person in front of him is always the most interesting thing in the room, and they are being given the gift of being fully seen. Marcus and I have always been close in the way that grandparents and grandchildren sometimes are, skipping a generation in terms of temperament and landing somewhere that feels like recognition. He came to stay with me for 2 weeks every summer since he was 8 years old. We cooked together, worked in the garden together, watched old films together that his friends had never heard of. He asked questions the way good students ask questions, not to perform curiosity, but because he actually wanted the answers. The summer after Dorothy passed, he came for 3 weeks instead of 2. He didn't explain why. He just showed up with an extra bag and stayed longer. I didn't ask him to explain. I understood. In October of the year before the meeting, Marcus called me on a Wednesday evening. He was at school, between classes, and his voice was careful in the way it only gets when he is about to say something he has been thinking about for a while. "Grandpa," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you okay? With everything Mom and Aunt Denise and Uncle Walter have been saying?" I told him I was fine. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means he heard what I said and is deciding whether it matches what he knows. "Okay," he said finally, "but Grandpa, if something happened, if someone tried to do something you didn't want, you'd tell me, right?" I told him I would. I want you to remember that conversation, because Marcus remembered it, and he did something with it that I did not know about until a Sunday in March when he stood up in my living room and changed everything. The Sunday of the meeting arrived the way Sundays in early March arrive in Winston-Salem. Cold, light, thin sky, the kind of morning that hasn't decided yet whether it wants to be winter or something else. I had been up since 5:30. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, where Dorothy and I had sat every morning for 32 years, and I thought about what was coming. I was not afraid. I want to be clear about that. I had spent 31 years walking into rooms where someone wanted something from me and had already decided I was going to give it to them. A meeting in my own living room was not new territory. What I felt was something more like a particular sadness, the kind that sits in the chest very quietly and doesn't announce itself. The sadness of a man who raised 3 children and is about to watch them try to do something that would have made their mother weep. Denise arrived first at 1 o'clock, carrying a tote bag and a laptop and the particular energy of a woman who has organized the agenda and considers this her meeting to run. Walter arrived 10 minutes later with his wife Sandra, who gave me a hug that lasted slightly too long and had in it the unmistakable quality of an apology that hadn't been spoken yet. Patricia arrived last with Marcus and her husband Greg. Marcus caught my eye when he walked in. He gave me a single nod. Not a greeting nod, something more deliberate than that. I noticed it and filed it away. They settled in the living room. My living room, with Dorothy's bookshelves still exactly as she had arranged them, and the photograph of the 2 of us at Myrtle Beach in 1994, still on the mantelpiece where it had always been, and the quilt she had made the winter before she got sick, folded over the arm of the chair she had always sat in. I sat in my own chair. I looked at my children. I waited. Denise opened her laptop. She had slides. I want you to understand that. My daughter had prepared a slide presentation for a meeting in her father's living room about her father's life. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying the careful warmth of someone who has rehearsed their tone, "we love you. Everything we're going to say today comes from that place. We want you to know that first." I told her I heard her. She began. "I am going to tell you what was in those slides, because I think you deserve to understand the full shape of what my children had built before they walked into my house that Sunday." The first slide was titled Future Planning, and it had 3 bullet points about the challenges of aging alone in a large property. The word alone appeared twice in the first slide. I counted. The second slide was about the house. Denise had pulled the Zillow estimate. She had it up there on the screen, the address I had lived at for 36 years, with a number next to it that I will not repeat here, because it is my business and not the internet's. But I will tell you, it was a significant number that had grown considerably from what Dorothy and I paid in 1988. Walter took over at this point and talked about the market, about timing, about the advantages of selling before the peak rather than after. He used the phrase strategic liquidity twice in 4 minutes, which is not a phrase that belongs in a conversation between a father and his children about his home. The third slide was the one that changed the temperature in the room. It was about my savings. Not the exact number. They didn't know the exact number. But Denise had done research. She had found information about the pension, about the general range of savings a person in my professional bracket might accumulate over 40 years of careful living. She had a pie chart. My children had made a pie chart about my money. The slide was titled Asset Management and Long-Term Care Planning. And what Denise presented, in the measured and organized way she presented everything, was a proposal that I voluntarily transfer management of my savings and assets to a family trust administered jointly by herself and Walter, that I consider transitioning out of the Sycamore Hill property within the next 18 months, and that I begin a process of evaluating senior living communities in the Winston-Salem area, 2 of which she had already researched and had brochures for in the tote bag she had set on my coffee table. She pulled out the brochures. She set them on my coffee table. On Dorothy's coffee table, the one with the small scratch on the left corner from the time Patricia knocked a lamp off it when she was 11 years old, and we had never fixed it, because Dorothy said the scratch was part of the story of the table, and the story was worth keeping. She set the brochures on that table. I looked at my children. Walter was nodding with the focused expression of a man who believes he is being helpful. Sandra was looking at the window. Patricia was looking at the floor. Patricia, I noticed, had not said a single word. I looked at her. She looked up and met my eyes for one moment and then looked back at the floor, and in that moment I understood something that I will tell you about in a moment. "Dad," Denise said, "we want to hear your thoughts. This is a conversation." I said, "Thank you, Denise. I appreciate the work you put into this." Then I said, "But I have some questions," and I began to ask them. I have spent 31 years conducting difficult conversations professionally. Parent meetings where accusations were flying. Staff disagreements that had been building for years. School board sessions where the politics were thick enough to cut, and everyone in the room was managing 3 agendas simultaneously. I know how to ask a question in a way that sounds like curiosity, and functions like a light being turned on in a dark room. The first question I asked Walter was simple. Has something happened to my finances that I am not aware of? Is there a specific concern about my ability to manage my own money? Walter shifted. No, Dad, it's just forward thinking. The second question I asked Denise. Did you speak with my attorney before preparing this presentation? She blinked. No, why would we? Because, I said pleasantly, any transfer of assets or establishment of a family trust would require my attorney's involvement. I'm curious why that step wasn't included in the planning. She had not considered that. I could see her recalibrating. The third question I directed at Patricia. Patricia, I said, you haven't spoken since you sat down. Is there something you want to say? Patricia looked up. Her eyes were wet at the corners. She opened her mouth. Walter cut across her. Patricia is in agreement with us, Dad. We all talked this through. I looked at Walter. Then I looked at Patricia. I said, I am asking Patricia. Patricia looked at her hands. She said, I just want what's best for you, Dad. I waited to see if she had more. She didn't. What happened in the next 90 seconds I could not have engineered if I had tried for 100 years. Marcus stood up. He had been sitting in the corner of the room near the window. his long legs folded at an angle, the way 16-year-olds sit when they have been told to be present at an adult conversation and are processing approximately 4 times as much as anyone realizes. He had been quiet the entire meeting. He had not looked at his phone. He had not shifted or sighed or done any of the things a teenager does when a room has stopped being interesting to them. He had been watching, and he had been listening, and apparently, for the last 47 minutes, he had been recording. He stood up. He was holding his phone. He looked at his mother first. She looked back at him, with an expression I could not entirely read, but that contained, I thought, something that was not surprise. Then he looked at his Uncle Walter. He looked at his Aunt Denise. He looked at Greg, his own father, who had also said almost nothing, and who was now sitting very straight, in the way people sit when they sense something is about to shift. Then he looked at me. "Grandpa," he said, "I need you to hear something." He pressed play. The recording started 4 days before the Sunday meeting. I want you to understand that. Marcus had not walked into my living room that afternoon and spontaneously decided to record. He had started recording 4 days earlier, when Patricia had received a phone call from Denise that Marcus, in the next room, supposedly doing homework, had listened to through a door that was not fully closed. What he had heard on his mother's end of that call had been enough. The recording he played was 41 seconds long. 41 seconds of a phone conversation between Walter and Denise, captured by Marcus through a second call he had placed to Walter's number from a borrowed phone on the Wednesday before the meeting, a call that Walter answered and did not realize had connected while he was in the middle of speaking to someone else. I will tell you what was in those 41 seconds. Walter's voice first, the tone he used when he thought no one outside his audience was listening, stripped of the careful warmth he deployed at family dinners. Practical, transactional, the voice of a man talking about a real estate deal. "If we can get him to sign the trust documents at the meeting, Denise, we move the house listing within 60 days. The savings transfer can happen in stages, so it doesn't look like one transaction." Then Denise's voice, thinner through the recording, because she was on speaker. "He's not going to just sign. You know, Dad. He doesn't have to understand the full picture," Walter said. "He just has to sign. Once it's in the trust, we manage it. That's the whole point." A pause. "What about Patricia?" Denise's voice. "Patricia will go along." Walter said it the way you say something you have already confirmed and do not expect to revisit. She always does. The recording ended. The room did not erupt. I want to describe this accurately because I think the temptation when you tell a story like this is to make the moment loud. It was not loud. What happened in my living room was something quieter and more devastating than noise. It was the sound of 41 seconds finishing, and the silence that followed being filled with nothing at all. No defense, no explanation, no sound of anyone reaching for a response that fit what had just been heard. Walter had gone a color I can only describe as the particular gray of a man who has just watched the floor become a trap door beneath his feet. Denise had closed her laptop. I don't know when she did it. But the screen was closed, and her hands were flat on top of it, and her expression was the expression of a woman doing arithmetic that will not come out right, no matter how many times she runs it. Sandra was looking at her husband with an expression I will not describe here, because some things are between a wife and a husband and belong to them. Patricia had one hand pressed over her mouth, and her eyes were full and spilling, and she was looking at me, not at Walter, not at Denise, at me, with the specific kind of grief that belongs to someone who knew a thing was wrong and did not stop it, and has been living with that weight since the Wednesday it began. Marcus was still standing. He had not sat back down. He was looking at me. I looked at my grandson for a long moment. Then I said, "Thank you, Marcus. Please sit down." He sat. I looked at my children. I am going to tell you what I said in the next 12 minutes, but first I want to tell you something that happened before the meeting that nobody in that room knew about except me. Because here is what Marcus did not know. Here is what none of them knew. I had been expecting something for 4 months. Not that specific recording. Not Marcus standing up with his phone. But the shape of it. The general direction of what was coming. I had felt it in the way the phone calls changed after Dorothy died. I had felt it in the strategic liquidity conversations, and the forwarded articles about senior living, and the questions about the savings that came a little more specifically each time. I had called my attorney in November. A woman named Constance Webb, who has had a practice in Winston-Salem for 27 years, and who I had used for the house purchase in 1988, and for Dorothy's estate in 2020, and who is exactly the kind of attorney you want when you need someone who has seen enough of human nature to be unsurprisable. I told Constance what I was sensing. She listened with the focused attention of someone billing by the hour, and also genuinely invested in the outcome. Then I told her what I wanted to do. We spent 2 months doing it. Quietly, carefully, with the thoroughness that Constance applies to everything, and that I recognized from my own professional life as the only way to build something that will actually hold. By the time my children sat down in my living room that Sunday, with their slides and their brochures and their pie chart, the following things were already true. My savings had been moved 8 weeks prior into an irrevocable trust structure administered by Constance's firm. Not a family trust, my trust, under terms that could not be altered without court approval, and that named Marcus, when he turned 25, as the primary beneficiary. My children were not named. They had never been named. That had always been the case, but now it was structured in a way that a slide presentation and a Sunday meeting could not touch. The Sycamore Hill property had been placed in a legal instrument that meant I could live in it for the remainder of my life without the possibility of a forced sale by anyone. Not a family trust, a life estate, properly documented, filed, and confirmed. And I had updated my will. Walter had said, in those 41 seconds, that the savings transfer could happen in stages, so it didn't look like one transaction. There was nothing to transfer. There was nothing to manage. There was nothing in my financial life that a Sunday meeting could reach. The slides Denise had built, the brochures she had brought in the tote bag, the pie chart about my assets, they were a presentation about a life that no longer had the shape they thought it had. They had walked into my living room to take something that was already somewhere they could not go. I had been waiting for them to find that out. If you have been with me this far, I want to stop for just a moment, because I know some of you watching this right now are carrying something like this. Not the exact same story, but the same feeling. A family member who has started asking questions that feel more like calculations. A child or a sibling or someone you trusted who has begun to look at you the way people look at something they are figuring out how to move. The slow, unsettling realization that someone you love has started to see you as an asset rather than a person. If that is you, leave it in the comments. You do not have to use real names. You do not have to tell the whole story. But say it. Put words on it. Because the most dangerous thing about this kind of thing is that it happens in silence, and silence is where it grows. Say your story. I read every single comment. Back to the living room. Back to the 12 minutes. I looked at Walter first. Walter, I said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Not as a real estate agent, not as my son in a meeting he organized, but as someone who has known me for 45 years. Do you believe I am incapable of managing my own life? Walter's jaw worked. His eyes went to the floor, and then back to me. No, he said. His voice had lost its boardroom register. He sounded, for the first time in a long time, like my son, rather than a version of himself he had been performing. Then say that to me, I told him. Just say it directly. He said it. No, Dad, I don't believe that. I turned to Denise. Denise, I said, when you were 8 years old, you came to me because a boy at school had taken your notebook and told you it wasn't yours anymore. Do you remember what I told you? She looked at me. Her eyes had filled. She nodded. I told you that anything that belongs to you, truly belongs to you, cannot be taken by someone deciding it should be different. I told you to go get your notebook. Do you remember? She nodded again. Her mouth was pressed shut. That lesson did not have an expiration date, I said. It applied to you at 8, and it applies to me at 71. I looked at Patricia. Patricia, I said softly, because my youngest has always needed a different kind of voice from me. Patricia, I am not angry with you. I know you were afraid. I know that since your mother died you have been afraid of losing me too, and I know that fear can make a person go along with things that they know in their bones are wrong. I want you to hear me say that I understand that, and I also want you to hear me say that the way to protect someone you love is not to take away what belongs to them." Patricia was crying without sound, the way she has always cried since she was a little girl. Just tears, no sound, as if the emotion is too interior to find a voice. "I know," she said. "I know, Dad. I'm sorry." I looked at all three of them. "What you brought here today," I said, "I want you to understand that I know where it came from. Some of it came from fear, and some of it came from grief, and some of it, I am going to say this plainly, came from a place that had more to do with what you wanted than what I needed. Those are three different things. And I need each of you to sit with which one was driving you when you put those slides together." Then I told them about Constance, about the trust, about the life estate on the property, about the updated will, not cruelly, not triumphantly, with the same even tone I had used for 31 years when I needed a room to understand something important, and to understand it without being given an escape route. Walter's face, as I spoke, was something I will carry for the rest of my life. Not because I am glad of it, but because it was real. The face of a man watching a plan he believed was solid become a plan he built on air. Denise closed her eyes at some point while I was speaking, and did not open them again for a long time. When I finished, the room was very quiet. "Marcus," I said. He looked up. "Thank you. I meant it completely. Every word of it." He nodded once. He looked like his grandmother. "I want to tell you what happened in the days after that Sunday, because I think the after matters as much as the moment. Walter did not call me for 11 days. When he did, it was a short call. He said he had been thinking. He said he wanted to apologize, and that he was working on understanding what he had been actually motivated by, which I took as the beginning of something rather than the conclusion of it. I told him the door was open when he was ready to walk through it properly. Denise came to the house the following Saturday. She brought food, which is what our family does when we do not know what else to bring. She sat in the kitchen and she cried properly this time, not the controlled weeping of the Sunday meeting, but the real kind, the kind that has been building for a long time, and finally finds the room it needed. She talked about Dorothy. She talked about how frightened she had been since her mother died, and how that fear had turned into something she was not proud of. I let her talk until she had said everything. Then I made tea and we sat together, and I told her that I needed her to be my daughter, not my administrator. That I needed her to call me, because she missed talking to me, not because she was checking on my cognitive function. She said she would try. I believe she meant it. Patricia called me the night of the meeting, after she had put Marcus to bed, and what she said was the most honest thing any of my children had said to me since Dorothy died. She said, "Dad, I knew it was wrong from the beginning. I knew it and I didn't say anything, and I have to live with that. I am going to have to spend some time figuring out who I became when I wasn't paying attention." I told her that was the right place to start. And Marcus. My grandson Marcus, who is 16 years old and quiet in the way that deep rivers are quiet, and who noticed a phone call through a door that wasn't fully closed, and understood what it meant, and did something about it. I called him the Monday after the meeting. He was between classes, the same as the call he had made to me months earlier. "Marcus," I said, "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead, Grandpa." "When you decided to record that meeting, when you decided to stand up and press play, were you scared?" He thought about it for a moment. The careful thinking of a boy who does not give easy answers. "A little," he said, "but not of them. I was scared you'd think I overstepped." "Did you?" I asked. He paused. "I don't think so. I think Grandma would have done the same thing if she'd been there." I had to press my lips together for a moment after he said that. "She would have," I told him. "She absolutely would have." He started to say something else and then stopped. Then, quieter, "I just didn't want them to take your house, Grandpa. You built that place. You and Grandma built it." "I know, son," I told him. "I know you did, and it is still standing. I am going to say something now that I have been thinking about since that Sunday. Something that I did not say in the living room, because the living room was not the place for it, but that I think belongs in this story. My children are not bad people. I want to be clear about that. Walter is a man who spent so long in a profession where everything has a price that he began to apply that framework to things that do not have prices, that should not have prices, that were never for sale. Denise is a woman who has been trying to control outcomes since she was 8 years old, because control felt like the only safe response to a world that kept proving itself unpredictable. Patricia is a daughter who lost her mother and could not find a way to hold that grief without reaching for something, without doing something, without trying to fix what could not be fixed. I understand all of that. Understanding it does not excuse the Sunday meeting, but it explains it. And for me, at 71, explanation is part of what makes it possible to keep the door open. Dorothy always said that families are not finished products. They are living structures. They shift under weight. They crack under pressure. What matters is not that they never crack, but whether there is enough foundation underneath to hold when the cracking stops. I am still building that foundation. So are my children. So, in his own quiet and extraordinary way, is my grandson Marcus, who understood something about what a family is supposed to protect, before the adults in the room had remembered it. He gets that from his grandmother. I am sure of it. Today is October 2024, 7 months after the Sunday meeting. I am still on Sycamore Hill Drive. The garden Dorothy planted along the back fence is in its fall state, the tomatoes long finished, the soil turned over and resting under a layer of mulch I put down in September, waiting for spring the way good soil always waits, patient and already holding what it needs for the next season. Walter comes to dinner twice a month now. Not every Sunday, not yet, but twice a month, and he comes without Sandra sometimes, and we sit in the kitchen, and he talks, not about the market, not about strategic liquidity, but about his kids, and his marriage, and the things that are actually on his mind. I think he is learning to have a different kind of conversation with me. I think it is costing him something, and I think the cost is worth it. Denise calls every Thursday. No agenda, just a call. She has not mentioned the savings or the house or any assessment of my long-term care needs since the Sunday meeting, and I do not expect her to. What she talks about now is her own life, which turns out to be interesting when she stops managing mine. Patricia is the same as she has always been underneath the fear. Warm, funny, the one who still calls me on random Tuesday afternoons to tell me about something that happened at work that she thought I would appreciate. The fear is not entirely gone, but she is learning to sit with it rather than act from it, and that is all I ever asked. Marcus came for 3 weeks this past summer. We worked in the garden. We cooked. We watched films he had never heard of, and 2 films I had never heard of, and agreed on which ones held up and which ones did not. On the last evening before Patricia came to take him home, we sat on the back porch in the August dark with 2 glasses of lemonade, and the kind of quiet that only exists between people who don't need to fill it. He said, "Grandpa, do you think they really understood?" At the meeting? I thought about it. I think they understood what they needed to understand that day, I told him. The rest will come. Understanding takes longer than a meeting. He nodded. He looked at the garden. Then he said, almost to himself, "Grandma would have liked how it turned out." I looked at the garden too, at the turned soil and the mulch and the structure of the tomato cages she had put in herself the first summer, still standing, because I had never taken them down and never intended to. "She would have," I said, "and she would have loved you for what you did." He didn't answer, but he smiled. Not a boy's smile. Something older than that. The smile of a person who did something right, and knows it, and does not need it to be louder than that. We sat there until the lemonade was gone, and the August dark had fully arrived, and the house behind us was lit from within, warm and solid on its foundation, and I thought about the word that had been in my mind since the Sunday meeting ended and the room had gone quiet. Standing. Everything I built was still standing. Everything Dorothy and I had made together, the soil, the structure, the love we had put into the walls of that house over 36 years of living in it. None of it had gone anywhere. None of it could be taken by a Sunday meeting with slides. I am 71 years old. I am a retired high school principal. I am the man who poured this foundation, and I am not going anywhere. If this story reached something in you, if something in it landed in a place that needed landing, then do something before you go. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what comes next, because there are more stories here, more people who held on when someone tried to move them, and every one of those stories deserves to be heard. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now. Your city, your country. And if this story pulled something loose in you, if there is something in your own life or your own family that you have been carrying quietly, put it in the comments, say it out loud. You do not have to carry it alone. This community is here. I am here. I am Raymond Ellison. I am 71 years old, and that house on Sycamore Hill Drive is still mine. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than I can say. Please note, scripts developed with AI writing assistance, narrated and produced by our team.